We're at the main part of the evening now. Good, we're there. You'll saw that when Isha was up here, we gave her 2 delightful gifts, and you're probably wondering why we didn't give Alexander Downer a gift. Well, of course, we tried to give him a gift, and he kept on saying, no, 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 please, I don't want it. And I can't see what's wrong with a 1959 Penfolds Grey Hermitage, can you? I think the people in New South Wales should explain that one to our friends from the UK, but it just cost the Premier his job recently. Now that I've got your attention, members and guests, I'd like to invite to the stage, if I can have a little bit of shush there, please. This is the formal part of the evening. I'd like to invite to the stage Richard Houston, and as I said, that Richard is here representing the ANZ Bank, our event partner, and he has, of course, the honour of introducing our guest speaker. Please welcome to the podium Richard Houston of the ANZ. Thank you.
Well, firstly, thank you, Gavin, and fellow committee members. Just very briefly on behalf of ANZ, we are extremely honoured to be part of this event and having sponsored our guests or been informally involved for the last 5 or 6 years. This is my first one, and I now finally see what the fuss is about. They reverberate through the institution of ANZ, and I hope you find them suitably impressive. We certainly do. I think we now are involved with you in Shanghai, Beijing, and other exotic locations to be determined, and obviously already in Melbourne. So thank you again. Thank you, committee, for all the work that goes into it as well. Also, I'd just like to comment very briefly on the illustrious previous speakers. I think I'd like to echo Your Excellency's view of Australian POMI relations, without mentioning cricket too much. I've just literally come back to the UK where I'm based, or born rather, a week ago, and I've spent the majority of the last 4 years coming in and out of Australia, and I would say that I echo your sentiments entirely. I think we're very, very lucky to have this relationship. But I will also say that I really wish I'd known about women's cricket in the last 6 months. So you learn something too late, but it's worth learning, so thank you for that. Moving on, I mean, how do I introduce someone like Mark? I worked out that probably fully half of the room know him far better than I do. 40 or 50 of you, I think, work for him now. You don't need to stand up. 40 or 50 more will have worked with him at some point. And I guess there's probably 40 or 50 of us who'd like to work with him in the future. So it's hard for me to go through details of his life. Please bear with me. Obviously, there's still a couple of hundred people here who may not know all the details of his life. And I guess it's, what makes him stand out? It's clearly the fact that he's experienced mining literally from bottom to top, exactly the right way round, but rarely done in banking, so I particularly appreciate that. He graduated from Wollongong many, many years ago. It says here he doesn't want to say how many years ago. I'm guessing quite a few. As a mining engineer, but of course he's become much more than that. He's worked in more than 20 countries. He's worked in most or many, many companies. In fact, I heard tonight that when he moved from one company to the other, he wasn't accused of any sort of politicking. He was just accused of joining a circus. Now, obviously, that circus has worked out well. And over the years, clearly, the repairs and the hard work that you've done on the whole, anyway, has been a great success, which justifies where you are now. It's not just about the obviously well-known achievements in business, though. And I see, and again, apologies for this because I've drawn this off the internet, but I see that you're involved in a lot of charities and that you are also the chairman of the ICMM, which again, most of you will know better than me. But I think it is clear that above all else, you are a people's person, and that is the common theme, I think, in all the businesses that are represented tonight. It is technical. Clearly, mining is very technical. I know less about it than I should. But you can't make machines work on their own without bringing people along with you. And it's humbling looking at your background, how well you've done that in the past. I'm told and reliably that you've got the hardest job in mining now, but interestingly, you've just told me it's actually the easiest. So somewhere in the middle, you have an interesting job anyway. So I'd like to, at this stage, just invite you up to the floor. Members and guests, please welcome Anglo-American's Chief Executive, Mark Cutifani, to the Melbourne Mining Club dinner in London. And good luck.
Firstly, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure and a privilege to be here with you tonight. The comment about running away to the circus, many people will know that I actually started my career with CRA, and my first 12 years were with CRA, and it was a very formative time, and probably in terms of my career, one of the most important times. And I remember when I informed Lee that I was off to join Alan Bond and his try and turn Alan Bond's vision of this thing called the super pit into something that really worked. And in fact, one of my colleagues, Tony O'Neill, the two of us worked side by side through that whole endeavour. And Lee's main observation to me was, he said, "You've got to be kidding. That's like running away to the circus." And he was absolutely right. Anyway, history says that sometimes those experiences are the most wonderful, and it was a great experience, and the most, I guess, gratifying thing is the circus is still operating 27 years after the event, and it's still called the Super Pit. An interesting time. Firstly, I'd like to acknowledge both my fellow speakers. Isha, I hope to return some of the compliments that you provided us as Aussie cricketers during the course of my talk. And Alexander, for a politician, what a wonderful guy with a great sense of humour. And it was great to see you. And we all wish you, and we do genuinely wish you well in your new role. You'll do a wonderful job, and as always, you will represent Australia with great distinction. And I know everybody in this room that is here from Australia will look to do everything they can to support you and support the success of you in your role representing the country, and obviously helping to continue to improve relationships between our two wonderful countries. Ladies and gentlemen, I must say it is a great honour to be here with you tonight. The Melbourne Mining Club meets the Marylebone Cricket Club, both organisations steeped in history, one central to civilisation as we know it, and the other an honourable profession that dates back more than 5,000 years. As some of you may be aware, the MCC requested I talk to cricket and mining. And given my track record as a great cricketer, a natural request from those looking for sporting and industrial enlightenment. As a key member of the 2007 Ashes-winning Aussie team, now the English must remember all Aussies see themselves as part of any Ashes-winning team, so I am only too happy to share my great wisdom on cricket. I will, of course, share a few thoughts on mining and Anglo-American on the way through. So, first, I should establish my credentials beyond my sporting triumphs. As Richard pointed, I've been to the mining industry for 38 years. I've hired line responsibilities across 6 continents, and I've worked in more than 25 commodities. I started life as a young kid out of school on a cadetship with CRA, and had a wonderful 12 years learning about the industry, and in particular learning about the coal industry. And as I said, Lee's famous line of, "You've got to be kidding, you're running away to the circus." I see Hugh Morgan here in our time at Western Mining. Some of the wonderful things about this industry is you keep meeting people that you've worked with. Hugh is actually on our Australian advisory committee, so he's still telling me what to do. But most importantly, I met my wonderful wife in Kalgoorlie, and we have 4 wonderful children here. She has been the real strength in our family, and been able to carry the family while I've spent most of my time travelling around the world having fun. And as they say, having run away from the circus, there hasn't been a much better life. My third claim to fame, now I'm sure people know of Harvard and Oxford. Well, I come from Wollongong, the undisputed intellectual capital of Australia. For those that may not recognise the name, in literary text you'll probably see it referred to as the Gong. Great heroes from our past include Brett Lee, cricketer of course, Mark Kerry, an Olympic swimmer, and Wayne Gardner, the former world motorbike champion. Brett lived in the same road as one of my aunties. I swam and went to school with Mark Kerry, and I lived in the same street as Wayne. Now, obviously, it is really a bustling metropolis, is our Wollongong. Now, in terms of Wayne and his experiences in London, he was once described by the English press as the worst rider that had ever started in a bike race at Silverstone. Now, encouraged by that constructive and supportive description, Wayne went on to win the World Motorbike Championship. Wollongong is clearly both home to both sporting and the intellectual elite. Now, while mentioning the English press, I would like to take issue with being described as short and stocky. Danny, where are you? I would like it formally noted that I'm taller than both Tom Cruise and Mel Gibson, 2.5 inches taller than Tom Cruise, and my wife tells me I'm much better looking. Now, clearly the second photo here, from a more appropriate perspective, does a little more justice to my physique, and I hope those in the press corps take note. And of course, removal of the soft lens reveals the real man. Now, let's start with some history. The 2013-14 Ashes clean sweep represented a remarkable turnaround in the fortune of Michael Clarke's cricket team. So what had changed? Was England overconfident? Did they simply collapse? Or did the Aussies get that much better? I think it might have been a little bit of each. But most importantly, Australia benefited from a steady and wise hand in Darren Lehmann and the addition of the ferocious pace of Mitchell Johnson, who, instead of spending most of the time looking at his new tattoos, decided it was time to start focusing on knocking over batsmen, literally. A subtle tactical change, but very effective nonetheless. However, I've got to say that at the moment, I'm not yet convinced that this is a side that can go on with its newfound courage and performance. In looking at history, I think for a great side, or for the creation of sustainable success, a dynasty, if you will, at least 3 things are required. First, I think it's about leadership and the nurturing of talent and teamwork that goes with it. Secondly, I think it's about systems and processes that raise the level of skills and the consistency of delivering execution as part of a team game. And 3, I want to talk about disruptive innovation, or an approach that gives the team a unique or winning edge that is very hard to quickly replicate. And in winning, or in mining, in my experience, the same rules apply. So let's first explore those concepts in terms of cricket, and then we'll turn to mining. To understand my views on cricket and the context I'm setting regarding the Aussies, it is worth taking a little trip through history. In Don Bradman, we arguably had the greatest cricketer of all time, with great respect to Dr. Grace et al. However, after the undefeated tour of England in 1948, Bradman retired, and the Invincibles quickly lost that aura that went with the title. From a captain with an amazing 62% win record to 40% to risque be nude, and then 36% under the cricketing excitement machine in Bill Lawry. I remember Bill Lawry in the 1971 Test match series, and it was actually the first test that I attended. Watching paint dry was considered to be a contact sport compared to his exploits at the top of the Australian batting order. At a 36% win rate, I'm sure Bill was in danger of being named as an honorary member of the MCC, or at least he would qualify a front row seat at a Chris Tavares benefit match. In 1971, the rebirth of Australian cricket began. In the last test of the 71 series, Ian Chappell is appointed and loses his first test in true flamboyant and exciting style. Australia cheers for a new leader that at least goes down fighting, which says a lot about Bill Lawry and his pedestrian leadership. Now even a loss was celebrated, although with some ironic detachment. In the next few years, the Lilly-Thompson combination wreaks havoc across the cricketing world, and Australia is back on top, knocking the heads off English batsmen and generally behaving badly, something we expect and admire in our best sporting men and women. Anything to get up the nose of the English establishment, fine. Ian Chappell did his best to upset everybody, particularly Tony Greig and the rest of the South African B team. However, while this was a good team, it was not a great team. The key events that followed set the scene for what was to become one of the great cricketing dynasties of the modern era. Three key events that followed set the scene for what I believe was true disruptive innovation. In 1976, in the Olympics, Australia's disastrous showing stirred a nation that doesn't like losing. Heaven forbid the headlines read, "We're down there with the English." Now, as an aside, we have never been able to develop an Englishman's acquired taste for sporting humiliation. I guess it goes with Kippers and Russellidis grouse shooting. From this outcry was born the Australian Institute of Chort, and Alexander would probably remember the Royal Commission that followed the Montreal Olympics, the self-examination that occurred across Australia and in particular across the Australian sporting industry. The second event, a media investment thug by the name of Kerry Packer, who decided cricket needed an overhaul. And I don't say thug in a rough sense, but in terms of the way he belligerently pushed through the program with the support of Ian Chappell and made something happen that in the end was the best thing that could have happened to cricket and Australian cricket in particular. From this outcry and from these events was born the Australian Institute of Cricket and then ultimately the Australian Cricket Academy. That third event, which was the building of the Academy, created a new foundation for Australian cricket. Alan Border, Mr. Grumpy, then started on the road to rebuild Australian cricket. A period of transition born of grit and courage in the most difficult of circumstances. In Mark Taylor, we had an intelligent and a leader that had flair, building on Border's legacy and creating a new team and a new will to win. And then Mr. 72%, Steve Waugh, leader, warrior, and well-organised manager, which I will come back to. He brought science and a deep appreciation of the human condition to the Australian team. If ever there was a man that deserved to be awarded an honorary mining degree, it was Steve Waugh. While he denies ever having said to Herschel Gibbs that he just dropped the World Cup in that famous semi-final, I have no doubt he was thinking it, and it was the measure of the people's view of him that ascribed the comment to him. Now, just to reflect on Steve for an extra minute, here is a man that understood leadership, that symbols, structures and processes are all tools in the hands of a great leader. In my view, the preceding years of disaster and development and determination came together under his leadership. War with John Buchanan took business into the dressing room. They instilled a new sense of pride in the baggy green cap. They planned the demise of the enemy and they executed their plans with ruthless efficiency. Every aspect of 15 years of reconstruction of Australian cricket came together under Waugh's and Buchanan's strategic leadership, and in particular, Buchanan's strategic insights, I think, were key to that success. I was asked once why I thought Steve Waugh was so good. And the story I tell is of the Brazilian soccer team. Now, I've been working in Brazil for 9 years. And I once asked our Brazilian employees, why doesn't the Brazilian soccer team win every World Cup when the best players are clearly in this country and that you have the talent? What's missing? And the unanimous reply from the workforce was, we don't have the leadership or the ability or the strength of an individual to stand up and put the egos back in their place and manage this group to be a team to create something special. I guess an Alex Ferguson had a sense of what was required in terms of that leadership. In my view, that's what Steve Waugh brought to that Australian cricket team. A wonderful team of champions, but at the end, not necessarily a champion team. He and Buchanan made the difference. So for me, dynasties are born of leadership, the development of talent, the implementation or the understanding of the skills required in the game, and disruptive innovation. That thing that makes it so difficult to follow in terms of the change that's been introduced within the team. This is the sort of stuff management gurus have been talking about for years, and the one that we listen to so many times in many of the speeches that we are required to sit through, maybe like this. Now, in mining like cricket, leadership starts with the understanding or the seeing of what is possible. But not only do you have to be able to see what is possible, you must be able to reconstruct the business to deliver on that potential. Leadership requires both vision and management. Vision without management is simply exhortation, and management without leadership is process without a point. We can learn much from Mr. Cricket, and in particular, I think we can learn much from Mr. 72%. An organisation model is more than job descriptions, performance reviews and bonuses. It is about the way we organise to get the right work done at the right time, and we have to deliver. It's about developing talent, making sure we have the best people focused on exactly what we have to deliver. At Anglo American, I've listed a few important focal points that we've worked on in our first 12 months. Now, for those who are pondering our recent appointment to the role of Head of Human Resources, we see leadership and our organisational model as a clear source of competitive advantage. This is business unusual for the new Anglo-American and our team, and so our leadership is looking and behaving very differently, as it must. 12 months ago, only 50% of our top management team were doing the work we believe was necessary to deliver results or to deliver towards our potential. Today, the behaviours are different, the numbers are different, and the leadership change is starting from the top team. Failure to deliver can become a habit. Worse still, it can become part of the culture. We do not come to work hard, we come to work to deliver results. Hard work is always appreciated, but only results will be accepted and rewarded. At Anglo American, we looked at our history of performance against budget. We had only delivered our budget once in 10 years. That performance has been reflected in my chop chart showing the 2 years prior and including Q1 2013. And in fact, if you look at the chart, the columns on the left, the red indicates an operation that is not delivering its budget and has no plan, right the way through to the blue, where we have an operation that's delivering to budget and in fact has a continuous improvement program. When we started, only 11% of our operations were hitting their budget numbers. Today, we're actually up to 48%, and you can see a fairly significant shift to the right in terms of the organisation. With that, on aggregate basis, we're hitting our numbers for the first time in many years. It is an important part of the things we do as leaders in terms of creating new expectations that sets us apart from the rest. And I guess someone made the observation that they thought I might apologise for where we've come from or some of our challenges. No apology will be forthcoming tonight. In fact, I'll just let the numbers do the talking. In the last 6 months, we have halved fatalities across the business and we've reduced our injury frequency rates by 30%. Year-to-date production at the end of April compared to where we were last year is up 10%. And if in fact I take the platinum strikes and the closures that we've put in place to actually reflect and improve our performance, we're up 18% in 12 months. Across the board, in nominal terms, our costs are down 8% across the portfolio, and in real terms, around 13%. And on the big moves, I've just come back from Minas Rio in Brazil, where we've just completed the last weld on a 527-kilometre slurry pipeline, the longest in the world. We're already dropping fine ore in the fine ore stockpile, and we're certainly on track to deliver on our commitments this year. We are standing in the middle of the toughest platinum fight that South Africa's ever seen, and at the end of the day, it was the fight that had to be had. And there are many leaders in this room that have been through those fights, and at the end of the day, they are the fights that ultimately determine and define the nature of the industry's future. And from our point of view, that's the fight we had to have, and we'll see it through. While leadership isn't everything, with the leadership team we have built, they are showing that it's a good start. To my second point, we are taking the time to understand what every asset looks like and what each has to deliver, or can deliver. We now know what needs to be fixed, what should be sold, and why and how we should execute to deliver maximum value. And let me explain what you're looking at here. First, we start with a resource on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, that target represents the maximum theoretical value of each asset. Now, it's not my intention to go through a lecture on Mining 101, but this chart actually gives an insight into how we're thinking about business. First, we start with a resource. In our industry, the best fortunes have been made by those that take the time to understand what is possible. You start with a resource. If you look at the history of Hammersley, the great resources in the world, they started off relatively modestly, but the real gains came when people understood the full scope and potential of the asset. Our model is to make sure we understand the resources and how we can work them best up the curve, and we lost that over a period of years. We've got it back. Second, we engineer the key mining elements to make sure we can tap full value potential, and that's the 4 columns in the middle there. We see that, again, in many areas, we've lost the ability to look at the resource from an engineering perspective and work it to its potential. And then finally, once we've got the basics right, we focus on planning and execution, more like a manufacturing company than a mining company. Now, every one of our 69 assets has had material value potential recognised in our asset review. So let me talk you through some of the things we can see. Now, first, let me show you what the resource looks like. Before I do that, I'll reflect on a bit of mining history for those that remember the battle between Inco and Falconbridge for the wonderful Voisey Bay resource. Ultimately, Inco won the battle at $4 billion. Now, I remember those conversations well because we as Western Mining were bidding at the same time, and for wherever Hugh is, if he could remember some of the conversations, and I think we told Hugh that it was worth about $1.5 billion. Hugh wanted to fire all of us because he said, you obviously don't know what you're looking at, because how come those 2 Canadian groups were stoushing at $4 billion? Andrew Mitchellmore, I think, is here as well. He remembers those conversations. And in the end, it was the right call. But on the other side, I'd have to say Robert understood how to work the conversations on the basis that he did understand what the resource potential was. The difference between seeing a resource and understanding how to extract value is a big leap. And that's one of the great challenges in our industry. In our case, at Mogalakwena, we've taken the time to understand resource. 2 years ago, this asset was a flywheel in the platinum business in South Africa. Today, we have 140 million ounce reserve defined. It is second only to Norilsk as the most significant precious metals resource in the world. It is no longer considered to be the flywheel, but the cornerstone and the central asset which we will build a new strategy around. In of itself, it could deliver the world's platinum for the next 40 years. Whilst we don't intend to increase our production to that extent, we certainly see great potential. And as you've shown in the last 12 months, we've upped 50%. We've improved our production from 300 to 420,000 ounces on the basis of the understanding of what potential we have. And so you get the point on that. Now to the mining strategy, again, a key part of the changes that we're implementing across the group. I'd have to say, and Tony O'Neill's been leading this process, is looking at every one of our mining assets and understanding how we do things differently. By the time we finish, we would expect 50% of our assets will have significant changes implemented across the mining processes. So if I go back to Mulholland and just show you very quickly, Mulholland, top photo, is the original design of the pit. You don't have to worry about the detail, but if you look at the bottom photo, the change in those shapes, along with a redefinition of the resource geology, has allowed us to drop 100 million tonnes a year out of the waste development in that mine in 1 year. And in fact, over 15 years, the waste we drop out of the development to maintain existing production will reduce our costs, and the net present value of that is $1.7 billion. That was a 2-month exercise for one asset. So if I just show you what that looks like in the next slide, the blue or the grey to the blue line, 200 million tonnes a year down to 100 million tonnes a year is what we required, and the difference in the two processing or recovered ounces schedule is the bottom schedule. People were operating to an average cut-off as opposed to looking at how to develop the resource and doing the drilling to understand what it is. That's real value creation. Now, as we go through the opportunities, we see big opportunities to continue to improve and develop the resource. And so for us, lots of potential, but again, making sure that you understand what the resource potential is and looking at what it may be is absolutely critical in terms of changing the business. And for those that have heard about our Sission strategy, our new copper strategy, our nickel strategy, you'll see the changes that we're implementing. And if you go, keep going, guys. If you then look at driving performance, so once we get the basics right, we're then focused on our approach to running a very different business using a different operating model. Finally, and I talk about this business improvement work, I know Andrew McKenzie picked the theme up last year, so let me expand a little bit in terms of mining application. James? Yeah. Okay. Our model, or our operating model, is similar to what people are aware of in terms of Toyota, in terms of a total approach. In taking Andrew's lead last year, given I'm from Wollongong and I am a mining engineer, an F1 car looked a bit complex for us to get our heads around in terms of how we take that knowledge into our industry. So Mick McAleer, one of the guys we've collaborated with for 20 years, has designed a magic box as part of our 3-day development and training program for our leadership and our operators. The box is a complex construction that is made up of plastic pipes that have to be inserted in a particular way and in a particular sequence to work. We ask a team to disassemble and reassemble the box following a number of specific instructions that have to be followed, and that would include passing pipes through a hula hoop, sticking your finger in your ear and singing ting-a-ling-a-loo, and you only pass if you actually finish the job following all of the specifications that have been put down as part of the task. Now, we undertake the exercise 3 to 4 times through the process, and quite often we start at about 7 minutes, and so it improves through each iteration when we start to help people understand what industrial working processes look like. So, for the accountants, the Anglo-American pit crew is on the right and the Red Bull F1 team is on the left. In the 1960s, Jackie Stewart would be annoyed if a tyre change took more than a minute. Today, they're down to just a few seconds. At Anglo-American, people usually start at about 7 minutes for the box, and the best we've seen finish at is 15 seconds by a young crew out of Ghana. And in the end, the key learning is when you think about the process, you pull it apart and understand how to execute every task in absolute synchronicity, then the results that can be achieved are amazing. And given that I think we still remain a long way behind the industrial industry, these sort of exercises have been absolutely critical in helping our operators understand what we're trying to achieve. So our operator model draws on all the elements that you've seen: Six Sigma, lean manufacturing, and integrated planning, and brings all those pieces together, and then we take it into the field. And so what does it look like into the field? In our coal business, Seamus French started the program towards the end of 2012. He started with a mine that was delivering 3.5 million tonnes. That's 2012. He has, over a period of 18 months, gone from 3.5 million tonne to 5.5 million tonne last year. In the first quarter of this year is up to 7 million tonne. The operation that we had on the bottom there, Grasstree, has just broken the world longwall record for a week at about 279,000 tonnes. The only difference, not one lick of capital, but the application of an industrial operating model that focuses on the key tasks required to make a difference. It's gone from 59 hours cutting to 115 hours a week. The magic box in operation is a very powerful tool. The key is to make sure that people understand what it means, what it can do, and what it means for them. To take that further, that's a processing plant called Barro Alto that we visited in July last year. In 3 days, we worked up a new operating strategy and a new approach. The operation has now improved more than 30%, and a competitor that's located not very far away from Barro Alto actually had a 12-month shutdown because we do have an operating floor in the furnaces. We're now up to 92%, and we've taken 20% out of our costs. Again, simple logic applied in what is a complex process. We've simplified so people can understand the key parts of the process that need to be operated. We still see significant potential improvement because of and you're obviously getting rid of the downtime and the key issues that have been stopping the plant. And as we continue to improve, we'll continue to improve the numbers. If I then go to our top 15 assets on that value continuum, Anglo American has significant opportunities, and they are the 15 largest assets, but that's where we see them at the moment. And for us, that's the basis of our improvement strategy and the different pathway that we're now on in terms of running the business. So, very important piece. Now, in terms of taking that on, the final point I wanted to make, so leadership, understanding of processes, driving change, disruptive innovation. In my view, there's no doubt that we as an industry are lagging our competitors. In the petroleum sector, we spend 10% of the money allocated by the petroleum industry to research and development. In many parts of our industry, we're seeing a 15% increase in cost year on year. In my view, we're failing society in terms of delivering products that are affordable, in terms of sustaining and improving the way people live. If we don't make step changes in the application of technology and improvement in performance, then others will do it for us, and most of us will become subsidiaries of GE or some other group that's either concerned that they won't have the resources to build their businesses, or a concern that we've not got our cost structures under control and doing the right things in terms of delivering the future. And I think most of the people I know are up to that challenge. At Anglo Gold Ashanti, from a standing start 3 years ago, they've developed a new mining method that I think will make a significant difference across this industry. The interesting thing for me is 3 years from a standing start, they've now got 3 operating units in the deepest mines in the world. That, if it does prove to be successful for the long term, will show how mining can be undertaken at 5,000 metres safely, productively. It certainly makes a different future, or creates a different future for South Africa. And that's the type of change that I think we have to drive. We have to think very differently about. And I give one story in terms of disruptive innovation. I think I saw Tony Filmer in the audience. He came from CRA, was head of technical development. He was part of that process, along with Tony and many others in the room here today. That sort of change is an absolute imperative. The open technology platform, you forget IP, The open technology platform, we used 30 partners. No one gets to keep any IP. We share the approach. Instead of taking 10 years, we took, in fact, less than 2 to get something operating underground. It was interesting. I was with the US Army last week in Chicago, and we were sharing ideas on open platforms in terms of technology. And they were telling me the story that they need to develop a new suit for those that are first through the door when breaking into a house or breaking into some area that they have to clear. And the first person through the door is obviously the most exposed. If they went through their normal tendering processes and had to follow IP rules and processes, they said it would take 10 years to develop the suit. By going an open partner platform, 30 partners, in 12 months they've scoped and designed a prototype for the Iron Man suit. And they said the process they had to do to justify that approach was painstaking and painful. But they said from 10 years to 1 year in terms of a different approach. And they're the sorts of things I think we need to learn as an industry. So the change is an imperative for us as an industry, and certainly lessons from cricket, lessons from the army, lessons from all over the world should be the feeding ground for us if we're going to be what we need to be, and that's a leading industry across the world, creating a new future for the world at large. Ladies and gentlemen, if I could make some concluding remarks. Leading change in our industry is a high-stakes game, and I think we are failing the test when one compares us to almost any of our industrial colleagues. In cricket, we have now seen change, or we have seen how change can be conceived and led to put in place change that drives a sport into a new century, from leisure to science. We see the same potential in mining, but not within a narrow technical perspective, but across a much broader range of possibilities that all fit together. The game is changing, and while Steve Waugh started his leadership with a conversation around a baggy green hat, it speaks to a vision and an understanding of the symbols and the focus that a leader can bring to bear in terms of changing a business and changing a future. Steve Waugh showed what the future could be for Australia cricket, and he turned it into a reality. Finally, it doesn't matter if you carry a bat or an oil flame safety lamp. Leadership is about winning and understanding the things that need to be put in place to give you an edge. The hat may not be Steve Waugh's weather-beaten symbol of cricket domination, but it is a start for a team that is clear as a bell on what winning looks like and what each of us has to do to be part of a team that delivers on our potential. That is not a promise, it is a simple commitment, and we will let the numbers do the talking. I hope you have a wonderful evening, and it's been my great pleasure to talk to you today, and I think we're allowed to take a couple of questions, Gavin. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thanks, Mark. Well, we're opening the floor to questions now, and Ian and Matt have microphones, so if you've got a question, could you please stand up, identify yourself, and carry it from there. Ian, how are we looking your end?
Mark, I've got a question. It's Phil Beard from Bell Potter, actually, but it's not my question. It's something from a guy you were at University of Wollongong with, Mr. Tom Cruise. And he said it's a really interesting argument on the supply side of what you're trying to do. But what about the demand side? And, you know, the question that everyone probably in this room wants to ask is, and this is personally from Tom, what about China? And where does it fit? It's driven the last 10, 15 years. What about the future? Is it going to dominate, or are you looking for other areas?
Well, I think there's no doubt 1.3 billion people. The importance to continue urbanising will continue. Certainly, I think from an infrastructure point of view, it probably won't dominate to the extent it did, but it still remains important. One has to remember, in a fairly short period of time, China's GDP has more than doubled. So, you know, 7% on a double the number where it was 7 or 8 years ago is still a big number. I still think India will be a slow burn and will continue and improve, particularly with the most recent changes. That tells you the Indian people want change, they're demanding change, so it will come. China, there's no doubt, will remain important. It cannot afford not to grow. Will it hit the big numbers? Of course it won't. They will slowly pull back, but in the end, that's what you'd expect. So I think it remains important. But at the same time, in our industry, I think you have to be careful, cautious, make sure you're competitive on your costs. Prices will be volatile, but I think the prognosis in the long term is still very good. In fact, I think I heard Tom once say, we've got plenty of resources, it's just reserves we don't have a lot of. And I think that's the critical issue. It's becoming harder to develop resources, and so those that are able to convert resources to reserves, competitive costs, margins, and focused on capital discipline and returns will do extremely well. Simple as that.
Okay, Matt, I can't see you. Have you got a question up there? And while we're doing it, can we, with the camera, activate the camera rather than the logo slide? It sort of works a bit better. Matt, at your end, have you got a question there? Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm Nick Wilson from Business Day, actually in South Africa, but I'm here at the FT. I just wanted to ask you you wouldn't mind elaborating a little bit on what sounded like a bit of fighting talk there about the unions in SA, about saying that obviously this is the biggest fight we've ever seen in South Africa in the platinum sector, and that you're obviously going to see it through. I was wondering if you just wouldn't mind elaborating a bit on that. Thank you.
Yeah, probably an unfortunate use of words. The fight, there's no doubt it is a fight. After 5 months of strike, I'm not sure you could call it anything else, but let me be clear, I think the blame lays at both of our feet. To be in a strike after 5 months, something's missing in the relationship, and I think from a leadership perspective, unpacking what we're missing, I think, is as important as standing our ground when challenged or when put in the position we've been put in. Quite frankly, what's being asked for is unsustainable. And at the same time, if you compare the productivity in the platinum sector is 1/10 of the productivity in the Australian mining sector, and that's revenue per employee, and we're paying about 1/5 of the wages. So the key for South Africa is productivity. The key to changing the country and creating a new future for the country is productivity. Generally, productivity may not be the most important conversation today, but in the long term, it's the only conversation. And that's the conversation that we're promoting. That's the conversation we're promoting with the government. The new government has some significant challenges. They've started off looking to be constructive, but I think there are 3 things that they need to do to be supportive, and we need to listen and be part of the solution, and that is to follow up the National Development Plan with policy changes that are in the field and are supporting businesses and the workforce come together. I think the commitments in the Mining Charter need to be followed through and held where they are, and the changes to the Development Act need to be promulgated as quickly as we can. If we can get those 3 things right, and we open with a very constructive conversation with our workforce and beyond, then I think South Africa's got a great future. But this is one of those challenges that we have to take on as an industry, as a company, and as a country. And for us, I think at the moment we're at a very important point. If we can get it right, South Africa has a very different future. If we fold, if the industry folds, and if the country folds, then I think it's a very different future. I'm confident we'll get there, but it does need us to stand our ground and to be constructive and find a solution that works for the long term. And from our point of view, we've made a commitment to the government. We won't fold. It will be a different future, and we want to be part of that future.
Hi, Mark. It's Nick Stanovich from Bruin Dolphin. Why do you think investors should own mining stocks in a period where commodity prices aren't necessarily rising?
I think there are many great opportunities across the sector. I think the underlying demand for our product is strong. I think certainly Capital discipline has been a problem. I'm not going to go back through that. You've heard the stories. Every one of the new CEOs has got religion. I think the real issue is actually sticking to that discipline and delivering returns. So as an investor, I think if you take the long view, you will invest in commodities. I see this as a great opportunity for investors to get in at the ground floor. And I think the future is very strong. And I think you then have to make a decision on who you think have got the right opportunities and have got the assets that maybe haven't been delivering to their potential and that have got a vision for the future. And I'm happy to talk to you later this evening.
I think Mark's saying there start with the letter A. A. Matt, you've got a question over here.
Mark, hi, I've got 4 questions.
Can you stand up, please, and identify yourself?
Mark, I've got 4 questions. Firstly, gold price 2022, coal price 2022, iron ore price 2022, and is Australia going to get the World Cup in 2022, or is Qatar going to still have it?
Sorry, I heard the first 3. The Australia World Cup.
Australia
Gold,
World Cup.
iron ore. What was the fourth?
We're talking football now. That's soccer. 2022. Gold price 2022. I'm assuming, in answering the question, I'm assuming that Australia is going to get 2022. Coal price and iron ore price. 2022.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned over the years to start talking about prices. Now, I must say that Sam Walsh is in the room, so I am forbidden from talking about the iron ore price, but certainly I'm an optimist. I am an optimist, but one would have to say that there's a fair bit of supply coming on at the market, so I think it'll be under pressure for 2 or 3 years, but I think longer term I'm optimistic, and certainly the fact that we're commissioning a new operation this year, we certainly should see positive moves in the iron ore price by 2022, and certainly I'm not going to put a number on it, but I'd certainly see growth in the final 3 or 4 years in particular. On gold, if you look at the cost of producing a gold ounce, I think at least 50% of the industry is underwater at the moment. Certainly there was room for tightening belts. I would see gold's promise coming much earlier than most commodities, but again, the gold market is a funny one. Only 2% of gold in supply is produced in any one year, so it is arguable how much the marginal economics of supply impact. But again, I would think that gold will be in good shape, because I think most commodities will be in pretty good shape in that sort of time frame, given where we are today. In terms of Australia's chances in the World Cup, I think I'm probably a much better chance of getting that right than I am any of the commodity prices, but certainly I'd like to think we'd be a quarter finalist, but quite frankly, I'm not all that confident.
Matt, have you got any other questions at your end, Dan? Ian, how are you looking there? Right, I've got one question, of course. I did notice that our speaker from 2 years ago, Ivan Glassenberg, isn't here tonight. And Ivan is probably away somewhere scheming and plotting perhaps some takeover or merger of types. He was very successful with the Xstrata and Glencore merger. At the top end of the market, how do you see that play out? Is it an issue of economies of scale, or do you think we'll settle down? In other words, the merger process at the top end of the market, is it still something that we should look to?
Look, I've been in this industry for 38 years and I'm still waiting for it to settle down. It won't settle down. I think there will be those that are successful, those that are in favoured commodity positions, those that run their businesses well, and those that don't will disappear. A simple fact of life. And whether it's Ivan or whether it's somebody else consolidating the industry, it would likely occur. From our point of view, that doesn't scare us. Our job is to do a good job, run our assets well, and make sure that we deliver value for shareholders. It sounds like a bit of a cliche, but they are the facts. We do a good job, we create value for shareholders, and at the end of the day, somebody sees value, well and good. As long as the shareholders do well, we make sure that value is realised. We've done our job.
Okay. Unless there are any other questions, there's a question here. Is there a microphone here? Ian, have you got your microphone? Or have you handed it back? Here he comes. Twinkle toes himself.
Mark, I'm the HR director for the Weir Group and was very interested to see your appointment of Philip in the last couple of days. I was also extremely impressed by the presentation outset, which was around talent and how important that is to your organisation. Philip's not the classic HR profile, and I was interested in your... I might also mention that I'm not the classic HR profile either. I'm interested in your appointment. Please explain more.
I don't think Phil would mind me saying this, but I have been told it was a bold appointment. I thought it was an easy appointment. If I could say very simply, and if I could say this on behalf of Phil, one of the things that has interested me over 38 years is if you ask a leader of an organisation in our industry and you ask them the question, what organisation model do you work with, they usually or invariably talk to structure. And in my view, they probably don't understand the question. In the 1980s, and in fact Lee would know this extremely well given he led the organisational development process in CRA, in the period from 1982-ish, Lee, I think it was, to the late 90s, CRA was the fastest growing, most profitable mining company in the world. 17% year on year. I remember the numbers in, and Mark Daniel would help me, I think in 2003 when we did a back analysis of the industry, at that point in time CRA and then into Rio was the fastest growing, most successful. In fact, the merger of BHP and Billiton actually trumped, I think, that trajectory in heading towards being the largest mining company. In my view, the critical change that occurred in that organisation through the years was the whole organisation strategy change, the application of requisite or many of the key principles of requisite. And I think in those areas where I've seen that model followed, that we've seen great success. Clearly, GE's the classic example of the application of that organisation model, and we've seen many successes through a range of industries. So I thought that made a big difference. So I've always kept the learnings from those early days in CRA with me. We went through the same sort of processes in Western mining through about a 7 or 8 year period under Hugh. Not called requisite at that time. We talked about the Western mining approach, and I've seen great successes through the years. So in Phil, we've got someone that actually was very, very heavily involved in the Hammersley Iron reconstruction in the early days, understood what we're trying to achieve. And in my view, he's a thinker, he's a strategic thinker that thinks very deeply about our industry, has seen and been part of one of the great success stories of our industry, and is very keen and very interested in the human condition and how we can change our business and think about it quite radically and differently in terms of the difference. The change I'm talking about in terms of Anglo-American, when you lay it out, it's not that radical, but it is. In terms of turning that into value on the ground requires a very different organisation strategy, talent development approach than we've seen. And I often say, people say that people are our best resource, are our most important resource. What a load of crap. People are not assets. The building's an asset. This rostrum's an asset. The resources we mine are assets. People are the business. And if as a leader you don't get that, if you don't connect with every employee in your organisation so they feel they're part of something special and that they can make a contribution and they're part of that team putting that box together, you've missed the point. That's what we're here to do, to lead people. I think Phil gets that.
One last question from here. Thank you.
Leaf Carroll, Wardle Armstrong. Mark, I'm perhaps going to reiterate your last point. I was actually working several years ago for Gemcom, and we were working on your Sunrise Dam mine for Anglo Gold Ashanti, developing the MPF, the Mining Project Framework, mapping out all the data capture points and trying to develop the communication between survey, geology, mining contractor, etc. Some of the things I noticed whilst I was on site, one was the Anglo Gold Ashanti 1 programme, which I'm sure was developed with a bunch of people, including yourself, but how that seriously infiltrated from the top to the very bottom. The buy-in was massive. And the whole approach to operational efficiency was understood from the guys who were dealing with the resource model to the survey guys who are on a daily basis trying to deliver to the reconciliation programme. Do you think that level of buy-in is as a result of you as a person, or do you think you could generate that in other situations and other companies and get people to understand it?
Just to explain, at Anglo Gold Ashanti, we implemented this model. This model has actually started in CRA. We pushed it through Westerns, the nickel business, and it's been developed. At Anglo Gold Ashanti, they've just been awarded the SAP Gold Award for an SAP implementation, and the comment from the SAP people was that the Anglo Gold Ashanti business processes were the best they'd seen in the industry. And we actually had Toyota people audit what we were doing, and they said that we documented their cultural process and the specific business process better than they'd actually done. BMW and others had been through as well. So that's the program you're talking about. And it did make a massive difference in what was a business with really tough assets. I was part of a team. We started that process off. It's the product of a lot of learning. The key was the team. And at the next level, helping people understand what we were trying to achieve was absolutely critical, and having these conversations was the starting point. So it starts with a leadership conversation. It starts with commitment to people and demonstrating that behaviour on the ground, but then it's rolling it through. So it's probably hard to capture what we did there, but thank you for the feedback. Certainly the awards that they've now been awarded and the new mining methods that they're attacking and all the other things that have been done in a very tough industry is starting to be recognised. And so I think it's about the people, the conversations, leadership as a start, but you've got to have literally in an Anglo Gold Ashanti 60,000 leaders, people who believe, then you'll make the difference. So it starts from the top, but you roll it through, make it very clear.
Okay. Thanks for those questions, and we're getting to that moment now where we call on a vote of thanks. Now, when we started the Mining Club in 2001, immediately came on board as principal sponsors were AMC Consultants and Swan Global. And here tonight, I'd like to invite to the stage Patrick Smith, the CEO of AMC, and John Murray, the Group MD of the Swan Global. Would you please join us on the stage, gentlemen?
Ladies and gentlemen, the night is drawing on. I've just conferred with my colleague, and the first thing we want to tell you is that we're not prepared to take questions about Phil. Mark, wonderful speech, but let me ask Patrick, the new Chief Executive of AMC, to formally thank you.
Thank you, John, for that introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to offer a vote of thanks to tonight's speaker, Mark Cutifani. Mark was appointed to his role about 1 year ago, and his public statements to date have clearly set out his vision of success for Anglo American and the key issues that he has felt were the critical things that needed to be addressed I enjoyed Mark's presentation. I enjoyed the highlight, the summary that he's provided of some successes to date. But most importantly, I enjoyed the unbridled enthusiasm for the continuation of achieving his vision for success for Anglo-American. So could you please all join me now in thanking Mark for his presentation.
I always wanted to be a geologist. Is that a silver hat?
That's a silver hat.
I'll give him that one.
Put it back in there. There's another one for you.
All right. And the second one. This one.
Okay.
And I'm sorry, Mark, but the second one isn't a bottle of that 59 grains, but it's fantastic. All right. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, John. Thanks, Patrick. Before I conclude, members and guests, thank you. Can I just point out that for more information on the Melbourne Mining Club, you've seen our logo up there before, melbourneminingclub.com.au. We've got our functions. Join us if you can, you'd like to. Meanwhile, it's been a pleasure to bring the Melbourne Mining Club to you tonight. Mark's presentation tonight will be on Boardroom Radio, probably within a couple of hours. Cameron Young will make sure of that. That's about it from me. Please enjoy yourselves the rest of the night. Enjoy that lovely Elderton wine red. And we'll see you next year for the Melbourne Mining Club in London. I do suspect that the speaker for next year is probably in the room, but we'll work that out at some future date. Thank you for your time, ladies and gentlemen. Safely home, please.